If you as a parent represent God to your children, and for 8 hours a day your child is with other peers and other adults, they're away from you, you are conveying to your child that God is distant and unreachable. There is an old quote that says something like, for a child, love is spelled Time. That's really important for parents to understand. Is a lot of the pushback will be like, but I'm not really, I'm not able to educate my child as well, right? It's all like the academic arguments.
Yeah.
And it's like, you need to be there. Your presence is more important than whether or not they get into the best college, or they have the best scores on the SAT, or they get their dream job. Your presence as a parent is more important than all of those things.
And while we can call it homeschooling, it's really de-emphasizing the scholastic push to make every kid a Greek philosopher, and turning into how do we shape their character, and how do we shape their character to be Christ. That has to be with us in a bigger community called the church, where we help even one another out to do that with each other's children.
It's the parents that are tasked to that job. They're not to give it out to someone else. But even when they do that, what they're really doing is they're giving their children over to peers to be raised by peers. And if you ever read the book of Proverbs, this is something that Proverbs insists on you not doing, that you don't actually listen to your friends, but that you listen to your parents. If they are wise, if they're in the covenant community, that you latch on to your parents and let your parents guide you, because your peers, which is whatever they're going to follow the zeitgeist. That's what the young do. Whatever's cultural, whatever's trending in the culture, they don't have the lifetime of wisdom that your parents have. They may not know the word of God as well as your parents do, and therefore you're to follow parents. But what we're doing is we're actually telling kids the opposite of what Solomon told his children to do, which is to follow, lend their ears to our voice, and to follow us and listen to our wisdom. We're doing the opposite. In that regard, it's not just that we're doing something that is not ideal. We're actually doing something that's satanic.
All right.
Yes.
Good evening, you Canyonites, beggar Canyonites. I can see both of you. You can't see me, except for this very appropriate picture that Alexander picked on my behalf. But it's good to see everybody. It's good to know that people are listening, and everyone's been waiting for Thursday. I know that's like the first thing they look at is their notifications. The Beggars Canyon put out a new episode, and we didn't disappoint you. This is today is the day. So we're going to be talking about homeschooling, right? That's the first topic we're talking about, and really like. Homeschooling is an interesting term because it's a modern term, right? It's this idea that we have this public education system that most of us have probably been a part of, and at some point it's either it's not doing what it's supposed to be doing anymore, so we take education in our own hands and we call that homeschooling. But for the Christian, this idea of educating children is something that's in creation itself, something that Adam would have done if the fall happened or not. And really, it's kind of how do we do that now in our modern setting, and then what does the Bible say about education? And then what are some misconceptions that Christians have today, even about education, like private schooling? Is do we need to send our children away to be educated by Christian people, and that's the proper way to do it? And is there a proper way to do it? Or do we have a range of things that we can choose, but we have a principle overarching all of those things, so we can, have a little liberty and freedom there. So that's the overarching topic tonight. So I'll give it over to April O'Brien if you want to jump in and define further what I mean or what you mean.
So I think maybe where would be a good place to start, and maybe Brian can help with this, is kind of what is the biblical mandate for parents in raising their children? Like, do we have anything explicit in scripture that tells us this is your responsibility, this is your duty as a parent?
So Deuteronomy 4:9 tells you to, teach all the things that the Lord has done and commanded to your children. And then in Deuteronomy 11:19 says, you shall teach them to your sons, speaking about the law of the Lord, talking of them when you sit in your house, when you walk along the road, when you lie down, and when you rise up. Now, that does not sound like when you get a chance for a couple minutes a day, teach your children about the Lord. What it actually sounds like is that you're with them all day. And as you're with them, as you're living life, as you're waking up and lying down and walking on the road, and you're in your house and out of your house, wherever you are, you're talking about the Lord to your children. And so you are instructing your children. And so I think what's lost often with homeschooling is a lot of people are worried about how to train their children academically. First, what's the best academic program? Whereas biblical education is first and foremost telling your children about God and witnessing to your children about God, and building a relationship with your children, because you as parents represent God, which is why honor your father and mother is part of the first table, I would argue, not the second, of the 10 Commandments, because you are representing God to your children, and they're learning about God by having a relationship with you. And this is really important because I think most people who think about homeschooling or putting their kids in some program, private school, whatever it may be, they're not quite understanding that homeschooling is about, first and foremost, your relationship with your children, that through you they might learn and have a relationship with God. It's not about the academics are secondary. You can build something with your kids and you can think that it's about you building the thing. And I've made this mistake, and I think most dads do, right? And so you get mad about, it's not working correct. And it's like, well, you just lost why you were building something with your kids. It was to show them the character of God through you and to have a relationship with you. It wasn't about the thing itself. And I think this is what homeschooling really should be.
Yeah, I guess a couple of points to that is the first would be that we compartmentalize education. To your point, we look at a child and then we break them up into segments. So we say, okay, here's your academic well-being, your emotional well-being, and your spiritual well-being, and then we separate all of those things, and we think that those need to fit into neat little time boxes.
Mm-hmm.
So we think, well, I'm spiritually training my child because I'm doing 20 minutes of family worship with them at night. And so even if I've sent them off to private Christian school all day, I'm fulfilling that duty. And we don't recognize that a child is a holistic being, and that, like you're saying, you can't really separate them out in that way. And I guess that would lead to the second point that you made. And this is something that I think is the biggest problem with people sending their kids off to private school, or even sending your kid to another room in your house all day, is that your children need to be forming attachments with you, and peer attachment is a really dangerous thing.
Mm-hmm.
And you see this even with excuse me, even with there's a really good book that's called Hold On to Your Kids, and it's written by a developmental psychologist and a physician, neither one of whom are Christians. And they talk about how peer attachment is destroying children, because there becomes almost like a gang mentality,
Mm-hmm.
where all your kids are learning from other immature kids. So there's no growth in maturity. There's no actual growth in development. They're getting all of their customs and their values from their peers. And that, as Christians, should be a huge red flag to us.
Brian, your point is well made. In April, I think hit the nail on the head for the biggest issue but we also, like, in the secular world, we discombobulate, right, education with like religion. So parents are responsible for, I guess, maybe religious things, and then the school is going to be responsible for these quote unquote secular neutral things. And then you mix the two together, and then you get this product, this societal product that will help those around them. The problem is like you can't distinguish the two. They're like, April, I think you said they're one package, right? And all children are going to be influenced by their peers, which is why it's really important that we pick and choose what peers our children are around. But the primary influence of our children are the parents, right? So, like, for us, for this church, we have a co-op, and we purposely bring our kids together so that they can influence one another and learn to live the gospel out as the parents are teaching them in a supervised fashion, so that they aren't going off, April, as you rightly said, and becoming authorities of themselves and then influencing each other to do wickedness, because that's the tendency of the human nature to do. And without proper guidance, as Deuteronomy has just shown us what our 24/7 responsibility as parents are, and what Brian, what you said, every project that we do, homework that we do, going out and taking a walk, it is in furtherance of showing them who God is, as we represent God to them. And I don't think parents understand that they actually represent God to them. Otherwise, if that was something that was on their mind, then they might approach education, completely differently, because they're giving their children to other people who the children see as that represent God to them or an authority to them. And it could be a wicked God.
And you're right. And I think that what people think is that they're giving their children to teachers and other adults. But in reality, they've done surveys to where each student is actually getting about 20 seconds of actual, quality time with their teacher. What they're actually doing is they're giving their children to other children. Now,
Yes.
it's bad enough to give your children to another adult because that's a different worldview. And even if she has a same worldview, let's say she's a Christian adult.
With the best theology, it doesn't matter.
Right. She's not tasked with your job as a parent, and she shouldn't be. They're to be building a relationship with you. You're commanded to do these things with your children. The fathers are commanded to bring up their children in the education of the Lord. And father and mother are one in that regard. That's why you honor both your father and mother. They both represent God to you. But that's the idea. It's the parents that are tasked to that job. They're not to give it out to someone else. But even when they do that, what they're really doing is they're giving their children over to peers to be raised by peers. And if you ever read the book of Proverbs, this is something that Proverbs insists on you not doing, that you don't actually listen to your friends, but that you listen to your parents. If they are wise, if they're in the covenant community, that you latch on to your parents and let your parents guide you, because your peers, which is whatever they're going to follow the zeitgeist. That's what the young do. Whatever's cultural, whatever's trending in the culture, they don't have the lifetime of wisdom that your parents have. They may not know the word of God as well as your parents do, and therefore you're to follow parents. But what we're doing is we're actually telling kids the opposite of what Solomon told his children to do, which is to follow, lend their ears to our voice and to follow us and listen to our wisdom. We're actually telling them to listen to someone else's wisdom, follow your peers. We're doing the opposite. In that regard, it's not just that we're doing something that is not ideal. We're actually doing something that's satanic.
Well, and I think the other problem too is that if you as a parent represent God to your children, and for 8 hours a day your child is with other peers and other adults, they're away from you, and then plus whatever extracurricular activities there are, and there are so many of those. So let's say you only see your kid for an hour or two every day. Then you are conveying to your child that God is distant and unreachable. I don't remember who said this, but there is an old quote that says something like, for a child, love is spelled Time.
Hmm.
And I think that's really important for parents to understand is a lot of the pushback will be like, but I'm not really, I'm not able to educate my child as well, right? It's all like the
Yeah.
academic arguments. And
Yeah.
it's like, you need to be there. Your presence is more important than whether or not they get into the best college or they have the best scores on the SAT or, they get their dream job. Your presence as a parent is more important than all of those things.
Well, that's really the problem, right? Is ultimately if your goal is not God's goal, which is that they develop a relationship with you and know God further through you specifically, your goal is to make them a doctor. Your goal is to get them into the best college. Your goal is to get all the accolades. Like, oh, look how smart my children are. Da, da, da. Then ultimately, you are on a path that is contrary to God. And you've set yourself up as an adversary toward God. And that means even if you are doing all the Christian schools and all the Christian programs and whatever it may be, forget even the secular side of you could be giving your children over to a completely different worldview and all the satanic garbage that goes on in public schools. It's you're actually already following the devil's program by giving them over to a Christian school.
Yeah, I have a news flash for people. I mean, I went to public school and private Christian school. They were not that different.
Yeah.
Even though the worldview is better at Christian school, the ethics were abysmal.
Yeah.
Because the kids are all peer attached, they're still being pressured into doing all sorts of sinful and wicked things.
Yeah.
It
Well,
really is no different.
and if you're worried about the academics, like you can do things through the computer, you can be heavily involved and you can have a teacher in one of these programs that's on the computer, but you need to be heavily involved so that your kid is building the relationship with you through whatever you're doing. You can incorporate other people. There's no problem to that. But the issue is the idea of giving your kids away for a couple hours
Mm.
here and a couple hours there. It's like, no, this command is that you're the one who's educating them and you're the one who's doing this throughout the day. You're not just, throwing them away for 6 hours while you do something else.
Well, everyone's so concerned about preparing their children for this world to be competitive in this world, and to be fair, this world is very competitive now.
Mhm.
Information comes at us every second. If you're not in front of the line, you're going to fall back in a week, right? And you're going to be trying to catch up to everybody again. And Christian parents fall into this trap too because they want their kids to be able to be competitive in that world so that they can flourish in whatever that looks like. But we don't think about preparing our kids to flourish in the new heavens and the new earth, right? To be prepared for that, because that is eternity. This is actually going away. Now, granted, they need to be able to be competent enough to take care of the body. So, like, we do need plumbers and mechanics and carpenters and philosophers and theologians, right? To not to set ourselves up to be successful in the world, but to prepare ourselves to take care of one another. The church is a family as well, and half the time we treat the church just like we treat our families. We go off to YouTube and find our own education in public schools, right? And we ignore our family's education right in front of us. Like, you're not good enough. I'm going to go off with my peers and go see where the next trend is there.
Yeah.
So our children see us do that in church, and then we just think it's normal. So we send our kids off to school as well to be educated by, quote unquote, like we just said, Christians. And then they come out not prepared to take care of the church. They come out as rebels or for the men especially, their masculinity has run amok and they're uncontrolled. And we had this conversation, Brian, you and I had. We were talking about a guy who brought up the world today wants to minimize the drive of men, right? And we're like, you're totally missing the point. The drive is there regardless, whether you try to squash it or not. You can't get rid of the drive. The problem is, how do you direct it? And part of the education of sons and daughters is directing the appropriate drive to appropriate things. And parents are so confused when their kids go to a Christian school and they come out not a Christian or rebellious or not what they're supposed to come out as, like a super Christian, right?
Well, we even believe in America that there's a rebellious stage for teenagers.
Yeah.
And it's like
towards their parents specifically.
Right, towards their parents. I've got news for you. There is no rebellious stage. The rebellion in teenagers comes from what environment you're putting them in and whether that environment pushes them and allows them to be rebellious. Like my eldest was the only rebellious teenager that I ever had, and it was only because of an influence that was outside the family that came in that he spent the majority of his time in. He almost replaced his family with this other influence as he got older. And that's where the rebellion came from. It didn't actually come from some stage that all the kids have to go through, because the rest of my kids didn't go through it. So where does it come from? It's rooted in the environment of if your guides and your closest allies and the people you feel closest to are peers, then you're going to feel like parents are overstepping their bounds when they tell you you can't go to that party, you can't go with your friends here and there. But if you understand, if you've built that relationship with your parents and understand that they're your authority, you'll never see them as overstepping their bounds. So there's nothing to rebel against.
Well, and it's interesting because we see this throughout history, that it's not just the children who have been taken out of the homes, it's the parents who have been taken out of the homes. So there is I would say, demonic deception that has gone on, not just in this country, globally, that has tried to dismantle the family. And you see this, like Nancy Pearcey talks about this in Toxic War on Masculinity, how the Industrial Revolution pulled men out of their homes. You had a lot of men who used to work at home. They worked in, blacksmithing or carpentry, or they worked on farms. So their business was a family business. Their kids were learning from them in that. The wife was helping them in that. But nope, Industrial Revolution pulls men out of their homes. Then second wave feminism pulls women out of their homes. And then you have compulsory schooling, pulls kids out of the homes. It's like the home is supposed to be the backbone of our society. It's like the home and church is where our lives should revolve around as Christians. And instead, everyone's just been sucked out of the home. That should be concerning to you when you just look at this as a constant problem that we've had. So how do we regain that? We need to be more creative as Christians with how can we bring men back into their kids' lives. I understand we can't go back to a pre-industrial revolution time. I'm not advocating for that. But how do we be creative in getting men back into their families and involved with their families? And the same thing for women. And keep your kids at home. That's an easy one to solve.
Well, it's hard because obviously our culture has an economic mindset, right? So that's all economically beneficial, at least on a superficial level, because the men working in the factories and whatnot benefits the economy. Now you get the women working in the factories benefiting the economy. Now they can afford more, and now you train their children to be factory workers. So no one's really being trained to be doctors. No one's really being trained to be logicians and things like that. In fact, logic is taken out of school a lot. You're trained to answer Scantron sheets and multiple answer questions or whatever, and it's multiple choice. And it's like, how does that help you in any sort of trade or life? It doesn't, but it helps you be a nice little worker that then contributes to the economy. And I think the answer then is that we as Christians need to, and as hard as it is, fight against the need to be a 2-income household. Fight against the need. Try to show your children that, hey, the man works, but he shouldn't work to where he's not in the household completely. And the wife shouldn't work at all in terms of career or whatever. She obviously can help if she wants to get little jobs or whatever, but never to the detriment of the children.
It shouldn't be to the dereliction of the house. It should be in
Right.
support of the house.
Correct. And so, like women setting up shop somewhere and that she has her kids with her and selling flowers or whatever you might think of. There's, I'm sure a million things. I knew a woman who she had a sewing um, uh, shop or whatever, but it was connected to her house. And so her kids were always there with her and whatnot. So it's not that women couldn't have jobs at all, but the idea that somehow I need that extra car, I need this bigger house, I need more money for whatever Grubhub or whatever we want to spend money on Amazon. Um, Christians need to stop doing that, because what they're doing is they're feeding into the idea that yes, we need all these things. Well, you can't get them on a one income. So either the father needs to take another job upon himself now, and now he's out of the house completely, or the woman needs to take upon a job and she's out of the house. And then it's training the children that basically you're training your childhood up to just do what we're doing. And it's not sustainable religiously, morally. We're not training people to be like God. We're basically just existing and surviving, and all for what? So that a bunch of rich people at the top maybe can have a better factory and like forget all that. We have to have the goal that God has, which is that at the end of the day our kids understand and know God through their relationship with us as their parents.
Yeah, and I guess like I've seen some of this firsthand because I grew up in a farming community, and we had when I was in middle school, we had another kid who was in class with us, and his parents run a dairy farm. And so there would be a lot of times that he would get called in the middle of the day and pulled out of class, and he would have to go home and help his dad on the dairy farm.
Yeah.
And we all thought that was so weird. Like, oh, what a weird kid. He's constantly gone. He's constantly with his family. He's constantly helping with the business. And he did not care at all. Like, he didn't care what any of us thought of him because he spent most of the time with his family. Like,
And
it
that
was just
kid
a
grew up to
completely
be Drake.
it was just a completely different thing. But to go back to your point, like if people want to push back and say, well, it's not really, worker bee, when you look back at quotes from like the Rockefellers and the Carnegies, they are explicit about how the way that we do schooling today was standardized to create human resources for those companies. This is not a secret. This is why we do schooling the way that we do. It's
Yeah.
not for academic excellence of the children.
Well, yeah, it contributes to nothing trade wise. I mean, and trades are mainly what we need. You're not a better doctor because you can take a good SAT test.
Yeah, I mean, and I think to April's point, like if the school system is designed to make drones, which it is, right? It's a drone factory. It actually takes away the uniqueness of your child as an image bearer in Christ, right? So like it takes their unique, almost their holiness away by removing them and then conforming them to their specific image, and then going out in the world as that image and producing or manufacturing as much as they can for the consumer that has been taught to buy those things, right? So you can keep this perpetual thing going. And Brian, you said this a little bit earlier, but I think it is part of the solution to this is the Christian home to be like reductionist, like kind of be a reductionistic home where it is more like, okay, what do we need, right? And let's take what Paul says about the point of working period, which is again to help one another. So the money that we make that is extra, because we're taught to think if there's money in the bank that we need to get rid of it. You can't have any left over. You got to use it for things. So if we like stop having all these things and then have a lot more extra, and then we can actually take care of one another, and then all of a sudden a lot of these issues that we see disappear, as far as Christian not making a family not meeting, having ends meet, right? Or a father losing a job, right? And concerned about what am I going to do now? And then those things are taken care of. But that starts with the proper education in the home. And while we can call it homeschooling, it's really de-emphasizing the scholastic push to make every kid a Greek philosopher, and turning into how do we shape their character, and how do we shape their character to be Christ. That has to be with us in a bigger community called the church, where we help even one another out to do that with each other's children.
Well, and speaking of uniqueness, talk about something that's gender neutral.
Yeah.
I mean, schools do not educate children based on whether they're boys and girls differently.
Mm-hmm.
And frankly, even homeschooling curriculum is made generically
Mm-hmm.
to where it's not that you have it's everybody's taught the same. And you can do that with some subjects. Obviously, math is math, right? Reading is reading. But what you're reading may differ. What you want your sons to read and what you want your daughters to read may be completely different. And you might want your sons to go out and build something, work on a car, do some plumbing, and you might want your daughter to do something like take care of the baby, or learn cooking and cleaning and those sorts of things.
That's so sexist,
I
Brian.
know it really is, but in reality, like, what do little girls play with versus little boys, right? Little boys
Mhm.
play with guns and little girls play with plastic kitchens and stoves and stuff like that. Why? Because someone made them? No, because that's what they're geared toward, because men are protecting the household in terms of outside threats, and women are protecting the household in terms of internal threats. If if you're talking about like uncleanliness and things that like could bring disaster on the household in terms of sickness and whatnot. And so they each have their own jobs. That's totally foreign. Again, even in Christian schools, that they're brought up differently. But if you have them in your home, you know how different your children are, and you know how different the genders are, and you can gear your daughters one way and your sons another way, and it helps them become who they're supposed to become ultimately as father and mother.
Well, and that's really how we should be looking at education too, is what do we want in terms of roles for our children in the home as it relates to the home? And when I think of homeschooling, that's more the focus that I have. I mean, I have only daughters as of now. Um, so I don't see the other side of this. But I just look at them and I think, okay, I want them to be prepared to be wives and mothers. And even if they're, even if God doesn't make them biological mothers, I want them to still learn the capacity for mothering, even if that's just in the church and towards, younger women as they get older. That should be my gear and focus for them. And like you're saying, all of that is lost in any other setting. There's no gearing towards, hey, you need to understand your role and your identity in terms of the home, because
Yeah.
they're not in the home. They're out in some classroom all day and then they come home and they go to sleep. I mean, how are they supposed to learn what to do in relation to home if they're never there?
Yeah, and to add to it, it's if you, because I do know some people who they'll teach like their daughters math, right? But and then they'll teach their daughters how to cook. But it's like, why aren't you applying the math she learned to the rest of what she is as a mother in the home? It's almost like it's a separate thing to where, well, if I need to get a career one day, I'll
Mm,
fall back on that. And it's like, no, that's the wrong way to teach your children. Like, they should become father and mother. That's your primary goal. I forget the, in case it doesn't work out and you can't obey God fully, here's a career. Like, forget that. Instead, it should be, how are you incorporating your reading into becoming the mother you should be? How are you incorporating your math and science into the mother that you should be? And so it's integrative rather than just categorizing and almost dividing up your life into different categories so that you can be, oh, well, I'll be a career woman here and then a mother here. That's the problem with American culture. You can't be both those.
What's fascinating / funny, I guess. Like if you just think about cooking, right? Gastronomy is an immense science. Like you can get down to the molecular level to make some amazing food, right? So like you can have some of the smartest, like most arithmetic minded women or like mothers making some of the best meals you've ever had, right? And you see this, like, turn on the Food Network. Like cooking isn't looked down upon. In fact, they try to make it like the only way that cooking is cool is to be famous or whatever. But cooking is like really a gift and a talent that a lot of people don't have, not because they're not born with that gift, but because they're just never trained to do it, unless they have some, like, you got to be passionate about it. But like for a mother or for whatever role son or daughter is learning to be, like there's so many aspects of all of these subjects, right? All of the like logical or the liberal sciences that can be applied to distinct roles. So there's not one like only men learn math or only women learn how to read or knit or something like that. I know learning how to knit for me, when I went to selection in the Army, we had to knit on like our numbers to our uniform. Like there was a purpose in
You had
war
to
for that.
sew.
I had to sew, right? There's
Sewing
like
and knitting are very different things, Drake. So that's
Yay.
fair. But again, it's like it's a requirement, even like, because a woman's going to do those things too. But even a man in a particular role, can protect his home with a skill like that. So like we should never minimize like, oh, cooking or cleaning. Like cleaning is so important that there are companies that have a bunch of cleaning ladies that go around and do a really good job about it. I can go on YouTube and you can find like the science of cleaning. It's pretty amazing, actually.
Well, it's literally everything having to do with the house is science.
Yeah.
And then some things are science and art. So making food, I would say, is science and art coming together or whatever. And a lot of things are that way. Like cleaning is really just science. I feel like it's pure science.
So we look at like, okay, if you're Heston Blumenthal, then you're awesome.
Yeah.
But if you're just a wife and a mother cooking in your house, well, you're lame.
Right.
That's how we look at it.
Right. You must be just some dumb woman.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, you're incorporating like a million different things. I mean, if you're actually counseling your kids and you're going through it, you're leading them, you're a life coach, you're
managing the budget,
psychologist. Yeah, you're in economics now. I mean, it's just all sorts of things that you're employing by being a housewife.
I want to address something too that we've heard in our circles, right? Some of the concerns with having your kids at home for school and not sending them off, right? So this is kind of connected to the whole masculine drive right now in the reform world. So there's this concern that if you leave the children, because like we've said, the Industrial Revolution has kind of pulled men away from their homes. I'm a prime example of that.
You're the extreme example of that.
Right. The Industrial Revolution literally led to my occupation. And so I'm gone for certain periods of time. So a majority of the education for my children right now, unless I'm home, and I'm part of it when I'm home, obviously, but it's through my wife, right? And there's this concern that if we allow women to raise our children, especially our sons, that they're going to become effeminate.
They'll give them women cooties.
They'll give them women cooties.
Because womanhood's a disease that's gonna get in their kids and infect them or something. It's like, what in the world?
Right. Well, they're not going to be able to harness or nurture the budding masculine boy,
the warrior spirit inside.
Dragon warrior inside.
Right. So, once he goes Super Saiyan, how's a woman going to stop that? So we got to send them off. We got to send them to other males, but I can't do it. The father can't do it because I'm gone. So they need that masculine influence.
Well, there's a few things, right? So one, let me just say, as a father of 8 boys, And anyone who has boys knows boys are inherently violent, inherently.
Yep.
So I think God has so placed it to where while they are children, that is prepubescent, they are primarily with their mother so that they learn gentleness. How do you calm a raging man down? With another guy? Usually it's his wife putting her hand on his chest and saying, wait, calm down. It's the appeal of the wife that's going to calm the man down. It's the woman who actually is the softer side that teaches men, look, you can't just be all violent and rage. Like, you have to actually control that. You have to actually, like, have a nurturing side and a caring side and whatnot. But beyond that, let's say, whether they're violent or not as sons, to go back to that real quick, I say that because you don't have to teach them violence. You don't have to teach them to be masculine. That's something that's going to come out already. Now, I do think that at puberty, it's primarily the man who should be training his sons. That it's primarily like the father needs to be the model for the sons, not the mother. So I think that's true. But before that, I think children are not men and women. They're girls and boys, and they're not adults. And there's something different about children, and all culture has seen it this way, that there's something different about children than there is about adults. And you don't train children in the way you would train an adult. So I might have my teenage boys watch a violent war movie because I want them to see this is what war looks like. By the way, if you were actually in this, you'd be terrified. It's not to be glorified. It's actually to be seen as horrific and something that you have to do if the time should come or whatever, but not something you should ever want to do. Make them watch, like, All Quiet's on the all what is it? All Quiet
All
on the
Quiet
Western
on the
Front.
Western Front.
Yeah, make them watch that or something. I might do that with my sons. I would not do that with my younger sons. They would not be watching violent war movies as younger sons because they can't handle it. And it actually might mess up their psyche, because if you expose violence to someone who's already violent at that age, you might actually lock in their violence. There's that proverb that everyone, I think, or most scholars would say everyone misunderstands, which is train up a child in the way he should go. And when he is older, he will not depart from it. But actually what the Hebrew says is train up a child in his way. And when he is older, he will not depart from it. Meaning, if you let the child just be whatever he was going to be, you will not be able to change him in the future. In other words, it's a bad thing to let him go in his own way. That's what Proverbs is pulling against. Don't go your own way. Don't lean on your own understanding. Listen to my voice as your father. Listen to the voice of God and fear God. That's what you need to do. So it's contrary to that. But if you train him in his way, which I would say is the way of violence, when he is a child, not when he's a young man, that's a different word. But when he's a child, you train him up in his violence, he will be a violent man. You're looking at raising criminals now, not men, not manly men.
So you, Brian, you have, some adult sons and some teenage sons now.
Yeah.
So it's different because you're at home. But for a man who is not at home and works, a traditional 9 to 5, what would be a good course of action for him as his sons become young men?
Well, as you said, it's really hard, right? Like I've had the privilege from being a pastor, and even being just sick at home, of actually being in the household and seeing the difference that makes. And it makes a huge difference. It makes a huge difference in discipline, the order of the household. I think it makes a huge difference in the way your children turn out. But the Industrial Revolution has taken men out. And so what men have to do is they have to fight. And this is hard because I've had 9 to 5 jobs before. It's hard to get home. You are exhausted. And it is very difficult then to just have really good quality time with your kids and interact with them. But you've got to fight against that for the sake of your children and have really good quality time with them as their model, because you're not their model, again, they're going to find peers. They're going to find, and they not just through going to school, they'll find peers by watching movies and watching TV shows and meeting people online through games or whatever it may be. And those are not the people that should be training them.
Well, and I think this goes back to a little bit of what I was talking to earlier, that we as Christians need to be more creative. And I know a lot of people are not going to like me saying this, but if you're a man and you work a job that does not allow you to be home with your family, then maybe you should find a new job. Maybe
Yeah.
you should think about, what other options do I have? Or can I find something that's remote work, or something that allows me to maybe work from home sometimes, or allows me to be more flexible, or whatever the case may be. I just think that I've heard a lot of Christians, and particularly Christian men, who will say things like, well, it's good for the man to just get out of the house. He needs to be away from the house. And that's what he should do. It's not good for him to be at home. So even if it's a remote job, it's not good for him to be there. He needs to be out of the house. And it's like, okay, well, how does that work with your children, particularly with your sons?
Well, the irony of that is that likely men who say that have already created a chaotic environment in their house to the point where they want to escape it. If you've ordered your household, you're not trying to escape your household. I don't want to. I'm not trying to leave and get away from my family. Like, that's ridiculous. And so it really means that you've created an environment to where it's chaotic and you need a break from it. And that's the same thing with women doing the same thing. And it's like, well, the problem is you, not the household, not your family. You need to actually order your family. And maybe the answer to that is more time with your family, not less. In fact, I know that's the answer.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think for me, some of the strategies I implement is showing the kids how difficult it is for me to leave.
Yeah.
So when I do, there's a loss, right? There's an there's like the kids are excited and expectant for me to return. It's not this. They don't see me excited to leave. Like, oh, here's my little mini vacation. I get to leave. This is seen as daddy has to bring home what's required for mommy to be mommy, and for you guys, right, to be loved, and for us to love other people. This is what dad needs to do. And really too, we see that, like, if we look at the Old Testament and the new as well, and even if we look at like the medieval church and even the early church, especially pastors, with local congregations, sometimes they had to go on long journeys for different synods or whatever. They had to go get trained for whatever thing. So they're or especially war, right? War would take fathers away for years.
Well, if your crops fail, you had to go find work, and but everyone like you were saying, everyone understands that as a sacrifice.
That's what it
that
is.
the man is making. I want to be with you. What's best is for me to be with you, but in order for us to survive, I've got to sacrifice this. And that's what men do. They're sacrificial. I'm going to sacrifice spending time with you now to go save your lives. That's very different than I'm going to my job because, man, my family just got to get away from it after a while. That's a totally different way of thinking.
And like April, you said that you've probably heard men say that, and I've heard coworkers say that, right? They're like, oh, I can finally sleep. I'm away from the family for 3 days. I'm like, I can't sleep because I'm away from my family for 3 days.
Yeah.
So like, it's a whole different dynamic. And to think that your kids don't pick up on that, well, I hide it. They don't see that I'm excited to get a little mini. No. They see right through you.
Yeah, that's delusional.
Absolutely.
Kids absolutely pick up your attitudes toward them. There is no hiding it.
Yeah. And like I said, when I am home, I am the kids are asking Katie, "Can I do math with Daddy? Can I read to Daddy?" And I'm like, "Yep, come on." That's showing them that what I said is true. That I don't want to leave, and when I'm here, I'm here for you. Now I'm sacrificing myself by giving myself to you now.
Yeah.
And you can see like the comfort there. Katie was telling me last night at the fellowship meal when I went off to talk to one of our members. Abigail couldn't find me, right? And she was like, "Where's Daddy? I want Daddy. I want Daddy." Right? So right. So again, it's like there's this comfort to your kids when the father's there, and the same with the mom. Like if Katie were to leave, Abby would be like, "Where's Mommy? I want Mommy." Right. So there's this like with the husband and the wife together, there's this safe functional unit that you are educating your kids with, and they see that.
Well, and just to go back to how we kind of started this whole segment, because men do need to go out and work with fire, they wouldn't have the little kids with them. Because they need to go out and farm with, strap up the pole and get it to plow. You wouldn't have little kids. So God has so designed it. And we were talking, Drake, as well, that women often, especially in times of famine, would be breastfeeding until the kids were like 5.
Yep.
Oh, that sounds awful.
Yeah, it probably was, but ultimately it's part of survival. So God has so designed it that the children as children primarily be with the mother. And if you have a good relationship with your wife, she is you. She is going to implement what you've told her to implement. You're going to back what her moves are so that you're working as a team together to raise your children. So your children don't see you as two separate things, as though, well, I'm just getting my mom's femininity. It's like, no, you're getting your dad's masculinity through your mother as well, because you know that her discipline will be backed up by his discipline when he comes home. Or what she teaches is what he's teaching you through her. So the idea is, I don't know. I just find it so odd. Again, it treats femininity as though it's a disease that the boys might catch. And in reality, I think the real problem is that when teenage boys don't have a father figure that they're looking up to, but rather they attach themselves to their mother as the primary parent, I think that is problematic. And that does happen in our culture. Now, partially that's the problem of the kid. The kid needs to choose his father over his mother if he's a boy, just like I would say that the daughter needs to choose the mother over the father if she's a girl in her teenage years, because that's who you're patterning yourself off of. Again, this is all assuming that your parents are gonna, they're living biblically and all that. If you're, if your mom's like, president of the United States or something, then it's maybe not. It doesn't work that way. But none of the proverbs really work if your parents are not living according to God's plan. So it's all assuming that they're wise and they're living within what God has actually declared in his word.
And we see warrior cultures that the mothers raise. We were talking about this, Brian. Right? The warrior cultures, like if you look at Sparta, the Spartans, the boys were specifically raised by the mothers first, and then once they cross that threshold, right, they're given over to being conditioned to be soldiers, right, to be like when they're getting trained by the men.
It seems like this is only something that we don't really understand in the US, because when Emmanuel and I have talked about this, and granted, I mean, his dad passed away when he was like 14. But when he was younger, his mom was more, present and visible to him. And then when he got older, he said it switched, where it was like just assumed that now his dad was going to be the one who was going to be around him more.
Yeah.
That was it's just a cultural thing that was to be understood.
Yeah. Well, it makes sense. I mean, you just like in the cultures where you're apprenticing what your father did or whatever, you're also apprenticing in terms of who he is, his character, and how he acts and things like that. And so really, I mean, in the end, your kids really are a reflection, or they should be a reflection of you if they're around you. If they're primarily around peers, they're going to be a reflection of peers and not you. And now it's almost like the cuckoo bird. You've raised the devil's children for him instead of God's, because they don't mimic you. They mimic the devil's world and the peers that frankly are following the devil.
I guess that goes to one of the objections that I hear a lot, where people will say, oh, but those weird homeschool kids, they're not socialized. So we
Yeah.
need to send our kids to, private school so they can be
Yeah.
socialized. And it's like, well, a couple of things. First of all, do you have no church community, or you're just not involved in church, that
Yeah.
your kids aren't ever around other families? I mean, that's sad if that's a reality for you. And the second point, and it comes also from that Hold On to Your Kids book, and it's a point that they made, is that the myth of socialization is just that. Because if you look at orphan children and you look at gang children and gang violence,
Yeah.
those children are primarily around other kids, and it doesn't lead to anything wise and good.
Oh, Lord of the Flies doesn't lead to like really great kids.
No, not so much.
I
It's
mean,
not an ideal circumstance.
I mean, because we all went, I went to public school, and of course there were no unsocialized kids in public school. I mean, there were no class of people were called nerds or anything in school.
But we almost think that socialization is like, my kid acts like the rest of society, and that somehow is a positive.
Yeah.
Look at society. You don't want your children acting like the rest of society.
Yeah, why aren't your boys going out and defrauding future husbands by sleeping with girlfriends? And why aren't your boys out, experiencing drinking and drugs like normal kids? And it's like even Christians kind of have this mentality.
They do. Christians do this too. It's just they'll have their, slightly different standard. It's like you can be holy I would say even in a reformed context, but just not too holy.
Well, the prodigal son story becomes prescriptive, right? Like everyone's got to be, I mean, that's what you do.
Go out and slay your dragons.
Right. And then come back when you're poor and eating, the pigs are eating better than you.
Yeah.
But it's like, okay, that's not the point of the parable. It's not permission, right?
Yeah, well, that's why everybody emphasizes the end, right? It's like, hey, you know what? God's okay for you to go out and do that, because he'll just accept you when you come
back. Right.
It's like, that's what you got out of that parable. That's not the point.
Yeah.
But yeah, it is that. Unfortunately, this idea, like what you really mean by slaying dragons, is have a bunch of, your kids go out and experience the immoral world. And it's like, I'm sorry. Like I've had people tell me that who had wrecked their children. And I was like, yeah, I don't want my kids wrecked like you. And it's unbelievable how everyone thinks they're brilliant people how to raise children when they have horrible children. It's like, don't give me any advice unless your children are in submission to you and following the Lord, and they're on the right path. If they're not on the right path, then I don't want to hear it. It's unbelievable. And I don't mean if like you just have like one kid that goes off. I had one kid that went off the rail. I have 8 that didn't. But if you have all your children gone off the rail, you don't know how to parent. So let's zip it up and listen to the scripture.
Zip it up.
And
well, it was your firstborn. It's a tester child.
Well, but even my firstborn was from an outside influence that primarily.
I'm just kidding.
So
I know.
But you get the point though, right? Like it's always the people who their kids are not listening to them, that think they have the best way to raise their children. And it's like, this is every man doing what's right in his own eyes. Let's go back to scripture and let's listen to what scripture says and not your opinion on what they should do. It is vital that they have a relationship with you. That is the most important relationship they will ever have in their entire lives, more important than their marriage, because it will determine the way their marriage works. It'll determine the way their marriage goes. It determines everything in their life so much, because you are the first model for God. You're the first stand-in. And if you actually portray God wrongly, or you just let your children go and they're going to learn God from their peers, they're going to learn the devil, not God. And so it's very important that you maintain a relationship with them until the point where the Bible says you let them go. And that usually is marriage or military service or something like that. It's not to go slay dragons. It's not to go sleep with a bunch of women and experience parties and drunkenness and all that garbage, or to live independently. Who in the world would say that that's training you for anything? To go live in absolute freedom where you can do anything you want. That's not training you for responsibility. It's training you to think of responsibility once you get into marriage and family as slavery, because you were free when you didn't have marriage and family, and you were free when you didn't have your parents there. And wasn't that great when you could do anything that you wanted? And that becomes like the dream in every man woman's mind of their idolized life. And so they become disgruntled with marriage and disgruntled with children and disgruntled with spouses, and it ruins people. It ruins families.
Yeah, if you're going from family to family, and what I mean by that is you're a child who becomes a young man, let's say, and then you're in submission to your father within the context of that family, and then you leave and you get married and you start your own family, that should feel like freedom to you, because now you're the head of your own house. Like once
Right.
you skip that stage, now all of a sudden it's okay. I felt kind of like maybe I felt that little cinch of slavery because I was in submission to my father. I was under his rules. He was the head, and now I'm the head of my own house, right?
Yeah.
So that then feels like freedom.
Yeah, that becomes the rush of, oh man, yeah, now I'm doing this. I'm driving the car now. This is
Mm,
awesome. But if you live on your own and you live independently, I guarantee as soon as you have the responsibility, and it's a huge weight of responsibility, you're going to view that as worse than when you were a kid under your parents, because you have even less freedom in that regard in your mind. So the dopamine rush should be, yeah, I got my own family now. Instead, the dopamine rush is, hey, I'm out on my own. I can do anything I want. You're ruining
mm,
yourself by doing that. And all that to say is that shows how important the relationship is with your parents, even until the last moment before
mm,
you become your own family.
Yeah. So I think at the end of this, if anyone's going to say, okay, what, you know, those concepts are all good and true, and I agree, and I haven't thought about those. So now are you saying that our family should try to find ways to bring our kids home? And does that mean I need to, if I'm a wife, I need to not go outside the home to work? Maybe I need to find something at home, or do we need to reduce the budget so we can live off of one salary instead of two? And I think our answer to that question would be, yes, right. Sometimes, like the whole strategy of your family might have to change from this, right? If you want to be faithful, and maybe some families are in deeper holes than others, financially, or what, it might be difficult to dig themselves out of it. But it's not impossible. And I've seen many families turn around. Their kids were in public school, and they were able to get them out in time to actually brainwash them themselves instead of the school doing it. But yeah, I mean, it's a hard thing. That's hard counsel to give, but it's the only counsel to do if you want the godly children. Not saying that that's like a stamp of like, if you do this, every child's going to turn out godly, but this is the way that God has prescribed families to run.
Well, I also think that, like, look, people are always going to bring up, well, what about the homes that don't have a father anymore? And it's like, yeah, we're not saying that, yeah, don't have a career and let your family, starve to death. And it's like, we realize that you have to do things for survival in less than ideal situations. However, what we're really speaking to is when you can be a whole family unit and you can function in this way, and you're choosing not to because you want a higher income, because that's just the way you've been brought up, because you just, it would be just too much work for you to do it otherwise, or whatever it may be. That's not really an excuse. You do need to give up the career if you're a woman, and you need to get back into the home. As the scripture says, wives should be workers where? At home. And so that's in Titus 2, by the way, if people don't know that. But ultimately, this is what you need to do. You need to make radical changes for the sake of your children, because the command to be fruitful and multiply is not just have lots and lots of children, because then the devil can just take them, and congratulations, you just populated the devil's world even more for the devil. Like, that's not the point. The point of being fruitful and multiply is that you're filling up the world to come, and therefore you're making godly children. That's what God desired by making them one flesh, a godly offspring. And in order to do that, frankly, the Bible tells it's not an enigma. The Bible tells us this is what you need to do while you're walking on the road, while you're lying down, while you're in your house, while you're outside your house. As you're basically living life, you're to have your children with you, not with someone else, as you teach them about the Lord, both explicitly in your words and through your character as they travel the road of life with you during those younger years.
April, I think we've treaded this trail pretty well. Any last things you'd like to add?
I have a quote that I would like to read, and we can end on that. It's from Charlotte Mason. It says, "We talk of lost ideals, but perhaps they are not lost, only changed. When our ideal for ourselves and for our children becomes limited to prosperity and comfort, we get these very likely for ourselves and for them, but we get no more." So what do you choose? Do you choose prosperity and comfort, or do you choose the holiness of your children?
Well, we really do see the shallowness of people who choose that way, right? It's their children are, they're well off financially, but they're not the people they could have been.
Yeah, poor spiritually.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, thanks for watching, everyone. Difficult subject, good subject. We'd love to see your comments, questions. We try to engage even the negative comments, so we don't discriminate. But if you want to know more about us, about our church, or about this podcast, send your comments, like and subscribe to this podcast. We want to get it out to more people. We think this is edifying. Our purpose in these podcasts are not to replace your local elders, what's happening in your local church, but it's really just a time where we're hanging out with you, talking about difficult things, and maybe putting questions in your mind or theology in your mind you haven't thought about before, and to enrich you and other listeners. So if you want to further support us, we have a Patreon as well. So there's the link for that, and you can become a fellow starfighter. And there's different tiers that you can join, and you'll support us that way. And stay tuned for more episodes coming next week. All right. See you, everyone. Peace.
Bye.
Bye.
Haven't read the series, might not understand what would need to happen.
Have you read all of them?
I've read all of Frank Herbert's novels. Yes.
Oh, you've read all of them. I've only read the first one because my grandma told me that the other ones were bad.
Let me just start with this. Frank Herbert is not a good storyteller. Not a good storyteller. He's a fantastic world builder. By Morgoth. I am your only future. But they don't they're bred for war. So Saruman literally grows them in his
in his vat.
Yeah, in his
orc
vats,
vat.
Right? And he gives a sword to him, and they go fight. That's and Uruk-hai are better than the original work or whatever, because they can be in the daylight.
The reason why I like Moby Dick so much is, to me, there's a parallel with Genesis. So it's actually history. It's history that Melville he's interviewed. This actually occurred to a bunch of whalers.
Yeah.
And the survivors he interviewed.
Yeah.
And it became this book. But notice how he's writing this history. It's not, here's all the facts that happened. All right, the end. He's writing it because he wants to put meaning and a message to what has occurred.